enemy shore off Korea. Those mountains are alive with guns, ammunition, and supplies on their way to the communist front. Our ship is here to see they don't arrive. In the moment before the big guns start firing, there's always a certain tenseness, reflected in the quiet attitudes of the men at general quarters. With the guns moving into firing position, I take my station on the bridge, feeling, as every battleship captain at times like this, the responsibility of command. For this is a war in which every broadside must count.
Hi everyone, Rick Russell here. Stand by for channel markers. Today we look at the Navy's situation in June 1950 when, with the surprise start of the Korean War, the Truman Administration realized it had gone too far in downsizing Admiral King's Navy. To get started, in May 1950, Battleship Missouri, the Navy's only battleship, which was serving in a training role, left on a scheduled midshipman cruise. All was well until she pulled into Panama, where the initial reports about an overwhelming invasion of South Korea by North Korea were circulating. President Truman had received the news from Secretary of State Dean Acheson while at his home in Independence, Missouri. "Mr. President, I have very serious news. The North Koreans have invaded South Korea." Truman offered Acheson a few choice words about stopping those sons of bitches. He had no way of knowing it then, but the Korean crisis, and especially the errors that led to being surprised and unprepared for it, would derail his presidency. With a major crisis and possibly World War III starting, the question came, as it always does, where's the Navy? The wise guy's answer was, in mothballs. That's not true, of course, but the heated calls for conventional ground and naval forces now to save Korea is laced with irony. Let's back up briefly. The Air Force's strategic bombing campaign did not go as well or as easily as predicted during World War II, while by contrast, the Navy had far exceeded expectations. No one expected the submarine campaign or amphibious operations to be as effective as they were, and rather than succumb to air power, the Navy took it to sea, made it the centerpiece of the fleet, and fought all the way to Japan from the decks of its carriers. Yet, in a flash, in early August 1945, the Air Force not only claimed vindication of its concepts, but also asserted that armies and navies were obsolete. Why waste money on them? It may have been difficult to hit a moving ship with a B-17, as the Air Corps discovered at Midway, but scoring a near miss with an atomic weapon was not nearly as hard. At the same time, without a rival at sea, the Navy, the only armed service whose existence is required by the U.S. Constitution, was on its heels struggling to make a case for itself. The Air Force had Truman's ear. The president hoped to revive and expand FDR's New Deal with his own Fair Deal, but something had to give financially. Aside from aggressively downsizing the existing fleet, in 1949 his Secretary of Defense went so far as to cancel the Next Generation aircraft carrier, the United States, shortly after laying its keel and without bothering to inform the Secretary of the Navy beforehand. Of the 23 Essex-class carriers that had been commissioned before the Korean War, 13 were decommissioned in 1947 alone. In 1949, the same year the Soviet Union successfully tested the atomic bomb and the communists took over China, it decommissioned 3 more. On 16 June 1950, when Kearsarge was decommissioned, only 4 of 23 remained in service. By the time North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel into South Korea 9 days later, on 25 June, the administration had downsized the Navy of August 1945 by more than 90%. Worldwide, the Navy's big ships totaled 3 Midway-class carriers, 4 Essex-class carriers, 13 cruisers, and Missouri. Even worse, the fleet train, including oilers, had been so severely reduced that the Navy's ability to sustain itself at sea had been significantly compromised. We don't need to replay the blame game here, but there's a good reason why this war became known as the Forgotten War. Strategic miscalculation, which is a nice way of spinning incompetence and negligence, as well as a lack of imagination, first by the Truman Administration, then by North Korea and its allies, namely Stalin and the Soviet Union, cost the lives of tens of thousands of American fighting men alone, mostly soldiers and Marines. When the invasion started, the largest U.S. warship in nearby Japan was the light cruiser Juno, CL-119, with 12 5-inch guns. In the first naval action of the war, she sank 3 North Korean torpedo boats on 2 July. The U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy each had 1 aircraft carrier able to respond. On 3 July, the Essex-class carrier USS Valley Forge and HMS Triumph, a light fleet carrier, launched the first naval air attacks of the war against North Korea, with the Navy's Panther jets getting their first kills. Other U.S. and British reinforcements rushed to the scene. Heavy cruisers Rochester and Helena, as well as HMS Belfast, arrived in time to support the first efforts to block and counterattack the North Korean army. The Essex-class carrier Philippine Sea arrived on the scene in early August. But with one eye fixed on Europe, and the Midway-class carriers would not deploy to Korea, and the other now on Asia, paraphrasing Chief Brody and Jaws, the Navy was going to need some bigger boats. To that end, Missouri unloaded the midshipmen, rearmed, re-equipped, and freed from her training role, left Norfolk on 19 August to wear out her main battery's gun barrels against North Korea.
It takes men with Navy know-how in the turrets to feed those big guns, men who've learned their job through long hours of training and hard work. Coordination and teamwork move the shells smoothly into position.
Stand by!
On the ground, Korea was turning into an epic debacle, forcing Truman to reverse course. First, he did himself a favor and fired his friend and controversial defense secretary. Lewis Johnson had been Truman's chief fundraiser in the president's successful 1948 election campaign and had dutifully followed Truman's lead by imposing strict economy measures on the armed forces, including personally canceling the carrier United States. Now, however, he received much of the blame for the setbacks in Korea. U.S. involvement in a hot war in Asia and the continued priority given to European security meant making rapid and major changes to American defense policy. As a result, in September, Truman replaced Johnson with General of the Army George C. Marshall. Truman signed off on a plan that prioritized military spending. The big ships would be coming. For starters, Oriskany, the last of the 24 Essex-class carriers, which was being completed to a new design, was commissioned for the first time on 25 September 1950. She went to the Mediterranean in May 1951 as the Navy adjusted its worldwide assets. Among the battleships and carriers the Navy was scrambling to pull from mothballs, Battleship New Jersey was recommissioned first on 21 November 1950. By then, General MacArthur had already executed his brilliant end-around at Incheon that in mid-September cut off and rolled up North Korean forces from the rear and recaptured Seoul with the support of 2 U.S. cruisers, 2 British cruisers, and 6 U.S. destroyers. Stabilizing the front momentarily bought time at home. Generally speaking, the pressing need for ships outstripped the ability of shipyards to return them to service in the very short timelines demanded. Carriers Bonhomme Richard and Essex were both recommissioned on 15 January 1951. Battleship Wisconsin followed on 3 March. 14 months into the war, Iowa recommissioned on 25 August 1951.
In the Korean emergency, our ship has been put to work in shore bombardment. My men like the job. They call it exporting steel to some tough customers. I call it making a battleship captain feel pride in his command.
Carriers presented a different problem because not only did they need to be reactivated, so did air groups, which meant recalling reservists who had served in and survived World War II to active duty. Some weren't happy about it. James A. Michener's novel, The Bridges at Toko Ri, and the movie based on it cover this issue as well as any historical study. Returning big ships meant returning to service a much larger number of smaller ones. The emergency put extreme pressure on the Navy to reactivate many ships that had only recently spent scarce dollars to deactivate. Heavy cruiser Macon was decommissioned on 12 April 1950, then pulled from mothballs and recommissioned 6 months later on 16 October. USS Alt, DD 698, spent less than 6 months in mothballs and was recommissioned on 15 November 1950. Overall, frustrating personnel shortages persisted throughout the Korean War, especially on board surface ships. While on station, they frequently lost their best trained sailors, especially key petty officers, to ships working up. In the first year of the war, between 1 July 1950 and 1 July 1951, the Navy grew from 634 ships to 980. In the next year, it added another 117 ships. On 1 July 1953, the fleet had grown to 1,122 ships. The number of carriers of all types had nearly doubled from 15 in 1950 to 29 in 1953. Among the surface ships, 104 destroyers, 66 destroyer escorts, 5 heavy cruisers, and 3 battleships returned from mothballs. We don't need to review the history of the ground war, but gunfire support became the surface Navy's most significant task. The sheer volume of surface fire support was phenomenal. From May 1951 to April 1952 alone, U.S. naval ships fired over 414,000 rounds in 24,000 fire missions against shore targets. There were almost no problems, although some barrel erosion naturally occurred. An examination of Missouri's guns showed scoring up to 0.85 inches deep inside the barrels. While carriers pounded interior targets, surface ships learned how to operate without their support, for example, using helicopters for spotting. The Korean War proved that conventional war was still possible and the preferred obvious alternative to nuclear war. Mainly, it reinforced the Navy's vital role in national security. Not surprisingly, in 1953, Truman's successor, retired General of the Army Eisenhower, introduced a new-look defense strategy which required the nation to prepare for both nuclear conflict and for limited wars over the long haul. For the Navy, this meant stabilizing its force structure at higher levels. The supercarrier was introduced, with the first 2 ships, Forrestal and Saratoga, ordered during the Truman Administration, and the next 6 units ordered during the Eisenhower years. The Iowa-class battleships would stick around for most of the 1950s, too. Finally, even if the Navy's secret weapon, known as Battleship West Virginia, didn't get a swing at the North Koreans, as Ryan advocated in a recent podcast, the Navy had made its case forcefully. The Korean War was a boon to the development of naval aviation, naval sensors and weapons, Navy medicine, and special operations. The Navy's value to the nation was no longer in doubt.
So dawn breaks again in these waters, and briefly in the morning quiet, a kind of peace seems to reign. Yet those of us aboard this ship, captain and crew, know the day may bring battle and turmoil, along with its daily ration of work, laughter, and just plain living. When it does, we'll be ready. For this is the life you ask for when you serve aboard a battleship, floating fortress of the nation's fleet.
That's all for this channel marker. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment or recommend another subject below. As always, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.